of you. So this is our 11th webinar, ISBR's 11th webinar, and I start with thanking Buyers for helping us arranging this meeting. And this is a very important topic academically, so we have made it a list of faculty who are going to take the 3 talks. And the topic of this webinar is From Voyager to Compass, dual pathway inhibition across the peripheral arterial disease continuum. So from Bayer, we have Dr. Vinisha, who is a medical expert from Bayer's. And also we have speaker Dr. Vidensha Rain, who is from Medanta Medicity. Dr. Shubhra Roy Chaudhary, we all know, from Calcutta, and Dr. Vimal Sumeshwar, Mumbai. So we have already spent 10 time in organizing all this. So I would like to start this webinar, and first will be topic will be from Dr. Vidensha Rain, and he is going to discuss about the current antithrombotic management and unmet need in the management of peripheral arterial. Dr. Anand or Dr. Vinisha, if you want to add anything at this point.
We really appreciate the opportunity given to us to connect with all of you in this period where we have like a situation, we are completely having a lot of distances, but I believe this webinar and web connect virtual platforms are going to be new reality where we'll be able to connect each other very conveniently. So I'll start with saying that I appreciate and thank you for the opportunity given to us. And in fact, Dr. Vinisha will be contributing anywhere where you'll be asking any medical query. You can like very well check with Dr. Vinisha on the same.
I request all the panelists to mute their audios so that only the speaker will have the audio is audible. Dr. Rajesh, I request you to mute your audio. Dr. Rajesh. Dr. Rajesh. I think Dr. Viren, you can start now.
Yeah. So, good evening, everybody, and Dr. Rajesh.
Just a minute, I'm going to make a call to him.
So, I'll be speaking on current antithrombotic management and the unmet need in the management of peripheral arterial disease. So, basically, what I'll be talking in 7-8 minutes would be what is the current treatment or guidelines what we are using in PAD. So talking about few of the trials and what is actually not the fulfilled part. So coming to, I mean, the slides are shared by our colleagues from the Bayer. So we all know that most of the data are from United States, and PAD affects millions of patients worldwide. And here you can see this is a slide from a 2016 study. So global burden of the disease, CAD and PAD. So we can just figure out that PAD is also a major chunk in the society. And the good or the bad part is, I would say that mostly they are asymptomatic and suddenly they pop up. So looking at this pie chart, you can say 65% of the patients are asymptomatic. 5% of the patients with PAD have classical symptoms. Otherwise, we all know like they present with so different stories to us, with a shoe bite or something else. So that history is not typical. Patients are not that learned. So we have an ample burden of PAD. So this is a very nice slide which shows that there is the burden or the incidence, you would say, depending on two classification, Fontaine and Rutherford. So it's basically an inverted triangle where you can see that the people of the triangle we have Rutherford 5, 6 or Fontaine 4. Otherwise, mostly the base of the triangle consists of asymptomatic patients or mild to moderate claudicants. So this tells us about the basically how the patients of PAD are distributed. So here a good study was done where they did data which refers to a 5-year cumulative incidence. And here you can see how the arrow is getting bigger. So looking at this, you can say like 7% of the patients, asymptomatic patients, over a period would develop to intermittent claudicants, and like 21% of the patients will have worsening of the intermittent claudication and progress to CLI. So during their lifetime journey, once they are diagnosed with a PAD, the risks or the progress of the disease keeps on increasing, and the risk of the disease progression definitely has a direct correlation with the smoking, diabetes, which is like now pandemic in our country. So this was a slide which is from a REACH registry, where they had done a 2-year rate per 1,000 patients, in which they have divided patients according to their different presentation. So asymptomatics, claudicants, the patients who had revascularization, and then prior amputation. So in this slide, the most important thing was look at this basically brown chart, which says that even those patients who had recent or prior revascularization, their number is basically the most which amounts in this chart. So whether it be a lower limb amputation or a surgical or a worsening of claudication, so this is a subset of the patient in which they had undergone revascularization, and they need a special attention. So what antithrombotic strategies in symptomatic patients we have? So current guidelines will go over in few slides. So current guidelines recommends basically SAPT or single antiplatelet therapy in patients with symptomatic PAD. So here you can see like class 1 evidence is basically symptomatic patients, long-term single antiplatelet therapy. So that is basically a current guideline, and then we'll go over a few of the slides which compares ecosprin with other drugs. So for asymptomatic, in most of the Western world, nobody recommends any antiplatelet therapy. So basically, it's ecosprin, which is basically class 1A, and then depending on what procedure has been done, revascularization, whether it is endovascular or surgical, you have different guidelines. We'll go over that. Coming to this, the rationale for ecosprin recommendation in guidelines for symptomatic PAD. So these are like evidence-based consideration, and this is like a class 1, and level of evidence is A. So antiplatelet therapy with ecosprin alone or clopidogrel alone is recommended to reduce MI, stroke, vascular death in patients with symptomatic PAD. So this is the only class 1A evidence and for PAD. So now what they have done is, this is like ATC, which shows antiplatelet trialist collaboration. Here they have done a study of a good number of patients. This is a meta-analysis, and it showed like there was 22% reduction in vascular events associated with antiplatelet therapy. So, but out of these 26 studies, only 4 were in which ecosprin or the aspirin monotherapy trials were given, and you can see that the dose was pretty high. It was like 900 to 1500 milligrams per day. So now there are many studies. So this is a Capri study. So what I'm trying to highlight is like many studies have been done to find out which antiplatelet is the best for PAD patients, especially the ones who have been revascularized. So clopidogrel versus ecosprin, they had done a study, and here you can see there was no difference in amputation and comparing both. So you can see this chart. So it goes quite parallel to each other, and there was no much difference. So now what they had done is they had done a dual antiplatelet equivalent to ASA alone in CV disease, and then what they found out was DAPT was unproven in stable PAD. So again, we know that whenever we do an endovascular stenting, we give a dual antiplatelet for 3 months, and then the data is still lacking that how long to be given, whether it decreases the progression of PAD is a question. So other studies, Euclid trial was done, and then what they did was ticagrelor, clopidogrel for PAD. So there was no difference in cardiovascular, so MACE, basically events, and no in acute limb ischemia. So this is like a summary of all the 3 trials, Capri, Euclid, and Charisma trial. And then mostly what they had studied was decreasing MACE, which is cardiovascular events. So 24% decrease in Capri trial, and then there was in Charisma trial 17% decrease, but none of the studies highlighted limb outcomes or amputation rate. So that was not outcome of any of the studies. So what anti-thrombotic strategies after revascularization, which is basically we are talking about. So current evidence base and guideline recommendation in those patients who have undergone revascularization. So PAD patients have underlying atherosclerosis resulting in high morbidity and mortality from other vascular beds. So from REACH study, so the data was 3 in 5 PAD patients also have atherothrombotic disease in other arterial territories. So basically there is an overlap between CAD, PAD, and despite surgical or medical intervention, 3 in 4 PAD patients will continue to experience disease, disability, or death. Here you can see the primary treatment of patients representing with CLI. So what they say is like the patients, they have divided 25, 25, and 50% of the patient were in the dark, you can say like this bar. So this was for a revascularization. And after 1 year when they studied, so out of this 50%, you can see 25% were dead, 30% alive and amputated, 20% continued to have CLI, and 25% CLI resolved. So basically, we all know that with current medications, the results are not that easy as we think. We try to heal the wound, we try to improve, the patient keeps on coming back and back. So long-term outcomes and associations with major adverse life events, peripheral artery revascularization. So this is one study, I'll go just fast. So they have analyzed, this was published in JACC in 2020. So what they say, they analyzed a lot of patients who underwent peripheral revascularization between Jan 2009 to September 2015. And outcomes of interest were composite MI or stroke, composite major amputation or peripheral revascularization. And these were the numbers according to the category. And all these subspecialties were used. So even here, the important thing is when they compared with cardiovascular events and the limb events were pretty high in patients. So there was 4 times risk of major amputation or peripheral revascularization than MACE. 1 out of 10 patients hospitalized for male within the first year post index encounter, and there was 8 times risk of major amputation or peripheral revascularization after post procedure male hospitalization. So what they wanted to highlight was that the progression of limb events is pretty high, even compared to the cardiovascular events, even after the current medications. So 2017 guidelines for anti-thrombotic management of PAD, again, the class 1 evidence is for single antiplatelet only. Otherwise, you have class 3A, class 2AC, and so we know that depending on the revascularization, whether you're doing percutaneous or surgery. So till date, the same slide, it's just the interpretation of the same one. So the label of evidence C reflects back. So rest are all 2AC, 2AC. The only one is with the single antiplatelet, and then we know that once a stenting or something endovascular is done for 3 months, you go with a dual antiplatelet. Again, the label of evidence is C, not A. And similarly here. So for surgical group, or it's basically long-term SAP is recommended after infrainguinal bypass. So no anti-thrombotic strategy has demonstrated efficacy for reducing MACE and MALE after peripheral revascularization. So coming to unmet need, I would like to, as we are running short of time, I would like to highlight the optimal anti-thrombotic management after PAD revascularization is unknown. So post-revascularization PAD has different thrombotic risks than chronic PAD. PAD anti-thrombotic practice patterns vary widely. We know that dual antiplatelet therapy after endovascular interventions is unproven, but it's a kind of standard practice which we all follow. And little data to support varying dual antiplatelet therapy prescribing patterns influenced by CAD treatment patterns. And no positive data published in PAD revascularization settings since this trial, ATC 1994. So this was just a background, and then few studies which were done were stopped because of the risk of bleeding. So we are still searching for the best way to care for post-revascularization PAD. So I would hand over the next talk to the next speaker, and then the last we can discuss. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
So I think next talk will be by Shubhro. Shubhro, you can share the screen, and Shubhro is going to discuss about the Voyager pad, latest evidence with vascular dose of rivaroxaban plus ASA in patients undergoing peripheral interventions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just 1 second.
So I am the host again now.
Aha! So have I shared my screen?
Just click on the green button.
Yes, yes.
Not full screen yet.
No, I'll do the full
Just
screen.
do the full screen. Yeah.
You got it, right? You got
Absolutely
it?
fine. Fine.
Okay, so I think we are running short of time, and this part of the trial bit that I'm going to discuss, it's quite a lengthy trial. I must admit that I spent the last 2 days reading the trial maybe about 3 or 4 times. It needed reading 3 or 4 times. It is a complex set of trial, including the primary objectives and the secondary objectives. But by the complexity, I do not mean to say that it is ununderstandable. The complexity is to the length to which the investigators have gone to actually do a proper trial. And I'll tell you what, reading and how the methodology of this trial is, I am now scared to do any trial myself, because I think it is just so detailed and there is so little to criticize regarding the structure and the construction of the trial. So I think whatever the messages that I'm going to discuss, I would encourage all of you to read this trial just to understand the methodology and to understand that how rigorous a trial can be. So with that little introduction, I think Viru has given a wonderful background. The bottom line is that we do not know what are the best combination of antithrombotic treatment is, both in the setting of a chronic PAD patient, which Vimal is going to discuss with the COMPASS study, as well as in the post-intervention, post-procedure setup, which I'm going to discuss via the Voyager study. So it is, the standard of care, the standard antiplatelet therapy regimens are not satisfactory. They're not uniform. Guidelines are very varied. There is, as you already heard about, the unmet need that in spite of our existing antithrombotic therapies, there is a 4 times increased ALI, male event risk in a patient who has had a revascularization. So therefore, there is some need to improve on what we do. And this trial is towards that. So now this is something that is, I think, we all need to understand, there's spate of these anticoagulation of the NOACs that have come in. I think this, preparing for this lecture, gave an opportunity to relearn this, and it is really important. So what we are going to, our agent, our study agent, or the experimental agent, if I can call that, is a factor 10A inhibitor, which is a rivaroxaban, and that is where it acts. And you see, the key aspect is that it subsequently blocks in a cascading effect. So one factor 10A blockage causes a multiple thrombin molecules blockage. And as you can see, thrombin is part of both the platelet pathway as well as the coagulation pathway. So there is an effect of rivaroxaban in both the pathways. So in other words, it potentiates the platelet pathway that aspirin normally blocks via thromboxane platelet activation, which we'll see in a later slide. So what rivaroxaban does is, by blocking factor 10A, which is required for thrombin formation. So by doing that, it blocks both the pathway, both the platelet aggregation pathway as well as the coagulation pathway. So there's a dual effect by giving rivaroxaban. So this is my own slide. The previous one was Bayer's, but this is just a slide to show you very quickly that all these new agents that we hear all the time, which part of the coagulation pathway each of those blocks. So once again, rivaroxaban, I've lost my mouse, but I think you can see that where rivaroxaban and apixaban blocks factor 10A. Then there are the direct platelet inhibitors, of course, like dabigatran, and then the other agents where exactly they work. And this is the principle by which it works, what I was explaining, that not only does it block, by blocking factor 10A, the thrombin pathway, but also the thromboxane A2 and the activation of the platelet pathway, which also aspirin acts. So there is a dual blockage of platelet aggregation and thrombosis. Now, the background of this in terms of rivaroxaban use has been done in several previous studies, including the ATLAS study, including the Pioneer, and then the COMPASS, and the Gemini, which we're not going to discuss but briefly mention. But as you can see, all of these are mainly in the acute coronary syndrome setting or post cardiac angioplasty, post PCI setting. there is very little data in the peripheral setting. Most of the peripheral literature that we know of is a subset analysis of this all previous cardiac studies, or perhaps even extrapolation of if this happens in the heart, then this should also happen in the leg. So that is the principle by which it has happened so far, but that is not right. So, but having said that, a lot of these studies are positive studies. What has been found is adding rivaroxaban in a cardiac or in a peripheral dose of 2.5 milligram twice daily, either to a single antiplatelet or to dual antiplatelet, does reduce cardiovascular risk, all-cause mortality versus placebo. So all this study, the basic structure is that you have got aspirin or a dual antiplatelet plus rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice daily, and on the other side, instead of the rivaroxaban, you have got a placebo. So these are largely positive studies, except perhaps one of them, Gemini, but not completely positive, but it was an equivalent study. But bottom line is that the evidence of rivaroxaban in a cardiac setting is already proven. And it's also known that actually, if you compare it to vitamin K antagonists, for example, warfarin, etc., then there is less bleeding if you use rivaroxaban. So what we will now talk about is the Voyager PAD trial, which will expand on this evidence. Basically, it will extend it from the coronary circulation to the peripheral circulation. So this is the Voyager PAD study, vascular dose of rivaroxaban plus aspirin versus placebo plus aspirin in a patients undergoing peripheral interventions. A similar model is going to be talked by Vimal, whereby in the more chronic PAD setting, the same drug regimen would be used, and Vimal is going to discuss that. Part of this has already been discussed, that we know that the cardiovascular and limb risks in PAD patients, particularly in the first year, are high. But this is something that we are going to assess. What is the evidence base for current antithrombotic treatment regimens in PAD patients post revascularization? And then the study question that we have already mentioned. And this is something that Viru already showed you, that there is a 4 times increased risk of ALI or major adverse limb events, in fact, which is much higher than the major adverse cardiac events. And as you saw, that in patients who present with acute limb ischemia, a percentage of patients who end up dying, amputating, staying in ICU, or having requirement of surgery is pretty high. And we have also seen that actually various combination of antiplatelet regimens, single, dual antiplatelet regimens, adding clopidogrel, for example, did not add any definite benefit to the MACE and male numbers by adding clopidogrel. On the other hand, it actually increased the bleeding risk. Adding oral anticoagulants also did not significantly improve the outcome, although it increased bleeding risk. So as you can see here in the bottom box, that various organizations, including the American College of Cardiology, the European College, the chest physicians, the Silver PTX trial, the IMPACT SFA trial, we are all aware of these trials. They had various antiplatelet regimens. In other words, it is to say that there is no definite guideline recommended antiplatelet regimen. And it is also true in our own personal practice, isn't it? I mean, I use dual antiplatelets for even more than a year. My surgeons don't use it at all. Some people use it for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So there is a huge variation in practice in terms of use of dual antiplatelets. And it is not based on evidence or definite guidelines. Now, just to highlight this population again, so the study population was a symptomatic lower extremity peripheral arterial disease who have had undergone an intervention. So we are going to look at these patients. The setting is a post-intervention. So the study would be, the people that would be included would have started the rivaroxaban versus placebo. They would have participated in the study within 10 days after the index interventional event. The mean was 5, but the study allowed up to 10 days. So the treatment was rivaroxaban on the top of standard of care, and the primary efficacy outcome was a composite of MACE and MALE. MACE means adverse cardiac events, MALE means adverse limb events. So composite of MACE and MALE events. So this is again the study question. We have done that. So we have talked about that already. So this is the primary objective. So this is the study design: 564 patients, double blind, randomized into rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice daily plus aspirin versus placebo plus aspirin. And then the further sub-stratification done, this is really interesting, done the surgical group, which comprised of 1/3, roughly 30-35% of the total interventional group, into rivaroxaban versus placebo, endovascular group with clopidogrel, endovascular group without clopidogrel. So I'm going to talk to you about the clopidogrel sub-analysis in a separate fashion, but you can see that the study methodology is fantastic. It tries to address a number of questions at the same time. So it's an event-driven trial. So the target event was 1015 and a median follow-up of 28 months. Now the inclusion and exclusion criteria, I urge all of you guys, if you have the time, to please read the supplement of this trial. Not to understand this trial, but I think the supplement of this trial tells us a lot of how we should actually counsel, talk, and measure and record our events. It is just so accurate. It is just so detailed. It is amazing. For example, when they count myocardial infarction, they actually don't actually count only ECG proven, TROP-I, TROP-T proven myocardial infarction. They also count silent myocardial infarction. So they've gone into great lengths in the methodology to prove these points. Similarly, for the male events, the counting of the vascular related amputation, the counting of the hospitalization after revascularization, the counting methodology is actually fantastic. So I think it is good educational experience for all of us to do this. So age greater than 50 years documented, and this is another very important thing. So the inclusion criteria is documented moderate to severe symptomatic PAD with all of the following, not either of the following: patients with an ischemic symptom plus an imaging evidence, CT or MR, of an occlusion or stenosis, and an abnormal hemodynamic element like an ABPI or TPI, toe pressure index. So it includes all three. So it is symptomatic patients with an imaging proof of disease, with a hemodynamic proof of disease, who underwent a successful lower limb revascularization for ischemia, and then they are going to be randomized into the rivaroxaban versus non-rivaroxaban group. The exclusion criteria are actually 23, and I won't go through all of them, but basically some of them was a prior index revascularization within 10 days, an episode of ALI within the last 2 weeks. If anybody wanted to put clopidogrel for more than 6 months, that's an exclusion criteria. Confirmed ACS within, I can't read my own slide, but confirmed ACS, medically documented history of stroke or TIA. But one of these things that they have included, which I didn't quite like, was the fact that major gangrene beyond the metatarsal toes was not included. So there was some small element of selection bias in actually not including the patients with a slightly bigger gangrene. And the outcomes were these. The primary outcome measurement was acute limb ischemia, major amputation for a vascular cause, myocardial infarction, stroke, or cardiovascular death. And then there were secondary hierarchical secondary objectives, which is the composite of these. These are composite objectives, as you can read. So in various combination composite objectives in a hierarchical way. So starting from 1 going towards 7. And the main safety outcomes was obviously bleeding. Bleeding was classified into or assessed by 2 criteria: the TIMI criteria for major bleeding and the ISTH criteria for major bleeding. And I won't go into the details of what those criteria are. The reason for including these 2 separate criteria was to include the post-CABG bleeding incidences, because one of these criteria, the ISTH, does not include post-CABG criteria. So that's why they included 2 bleeding criteria. That is important, and we'll see that in a second. So if you look at the baseline demographics in terms of patients' age, in terms of, just 1 second, guys. I can't see my slide myself. So in terms of patients' age, in terms of the peripheral arterial disease history. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So smoking, diabetes, COPD, EGFR, presence of coronary artery disease, prior MI, known carotid artery stenosis, use of statin, use of AC inhibitors. They were all well balanced between the 2 study groups. If you look at the PAD procedural characteristics in terms of prior peripheral disease, arterial disease history, history of prior revascularization beyond the 10 days, history of amputation, ABPI, indications for revascularization, whether it was CLI, whether it was claudication, what sort of revascularization was done, was it surgical, endovascular, hybrid? As you can see, roughly 1/3, 2/3 between surgical and endovascular hybrid. Medial days from starting the rivaroxaban, they're all well balanced between the two groups. So this supplemental table, I have added this, and this is just for the interest of my IR colleagues, just to show you that actually even the number of balloon angioplasties, drug-coated balloon, bare metal stents, covered stents, atherectomy, hybrid procedures, these are all roughly equal in both sides. Site of revascularization, that's one important point to mention, which is not in the bare talk. One of the inclusion criteria was distal to the external iliac artery. Whereas here, the site of revascularization, they talk about 162 iliac arteries in the rivaroxaban group and 158 in the placebo group. I think they might mean that somebody who required an SFA popliteal, but also had to have an iliac done as well. Perhaps that is what they mean by including the iliacs in this group. Now, the other great thing, I don't expect you to read this, I would just summarize this for you. The other great thing about this study is that you started with a study population of nearly 6,500 to 7,000 people. You divided them into two groups. Half was rivaroxaban, the other half was placebo. The rivaroxaban group and the placebo group, nearly a third of them did not complete their study in terms of having their full dose of rivaroxaban. Few people stopped after 7 days, 15 days, a month, 6 months. But you know, this was an intention to treat analysis, and they included people even who have had one dose of rivaroxaban into the study. So they did not exclude these people, which means whatever difference that we are going to see in the study result, the actual effect, if the patients are compliant and if all the patients are actually included in the trial, the effect would actually be more amplified. This is my analysis of the study. And this is the bottom line. The bottom line is that adding rivaroxaban to 100 milligrams of aspirin, 2.5 milligram twice daily, looking at a composite primary endpoint, there is a 15% increased benefit. There is an absolute risk reduction of 2.6% if you subtract 19.9, 17.3, and this is highly statistically significant. So this is the two curves, and we will talk about the nature of the curve in a second, but watch the curve carefully. Here is my arrow again. Watch the curve carefully. See, the graphs start separating quite early. So in other words, actually there is an early effect of adding rivaroxaban, and they continue to separate as you go along the time. So the benefit is accrual, the benefit is incremental, and the benefit is early. I think this is a very important take home point. This is all cause MACE and male. So 1 year absolute risk reduction, 3 year absolute risk reduction of 2.6, and benefit is seen as early as 3 months. Sorry, I've already said these things. And if you look at a subgroup analysis, acute limb ischemia, amputation, myocardial infarction, ischemic stroke, all of those show a reduction, significant reduction in most cases of adding rivaroxaban, except slightly oddly, composite of cardiovascular death. I can't explain this very clearly. We can discuss this at the end, that why is this discrepant. But to be honest with you, what the primary objectives that we were looking at, the secondary objectives we were looking at, they all show a significant relative risk reduction. And if you look at the hierarchical criteria, secondary criteria that we talked about, which are the combination of events, if you look at them, I'll just give you a forest plot like this. And if you can see on the forest plot that actually most of the events, most of the criteria, they favor the use of rivaroxaban. Sorry. Okay, I'm running late. So rivaroxaban 2.5 limb events, okay. And similarly, if you talk about unplanned index revascularization, vascular hospitalization, they all show a significant benefit, statistically significant. If you look at bleeding, yes, there was a slightly increased bleeding in the rivaroxaban group, but in most cases, they don't reach statistical significance. And most importantly, the bleeding episodes in both the criteria, they were not significant bleeding. They were not bleeding that led to much increased hospital stay or death or significant disability. So most of the bleeding were more minor bleeding, which is the difference in the rate. But effectively, if you look at bleeding as a whole, there was slightly increased, but not statistically significantly. So the key takeaways of the Voyager PAD primary study are that adding rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice daily reduces major adverse limb event and cardiovascular outcomes significantly and reduces unplanned index limb revascularization. The benefit appears early and is consistent over time, and there is consistent benefit in major subgroups, including those with critical ischemia. I'm just quickly going to go through this very important. Arun and Matthew, will you please allow me 5 more minutes?
Sure. Go ahead.
So I heard a bell. That's why I was scared.
No, there is no well.
Okay, all right. Then I'll just, because this is important, I think, for all of us to understand. So the objective of this part of the study is to understand that in symptomatic PAD patients who are going to be randomized to having rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice daily versus placebo, is there an added benefit by using clopidogrel? So in other words, if I give somebody rivaroxaban 2.5 BD, 100 aspirin, 75 clopidogrel versus I give placebo 75 100 aspirin, 75, is there any benefit? Or if I do not add clopidogrel, is there any benefit? So I need to understand whether there is any additional benefit by using clopidogrel, A, and is there any increase of bleeding risk by adding clopidogrel, and is there a temporal pattern to that increase in the bleeding? So these are the objectives. Okay. And if you look at the study protocol again, so again, both the endovascular group and the surgical group, this is mainly the endovascular group, because as you can understand, the post-surgical group did not have clopidogrel. So this is mainly the endovascular group, 90% are endovascular. So clopidogrel use versus no clopidogrel use, they are mostly balanced. Some of the features are statistically significant. For example, presence of coronary artery disease, presence of prior CABG, presence of prior coronary intervention. As you might imagine, they are more having clopidogrel. In terms of PAD history, claudication, critical limb ischemia, prior limb revascularization. Apart from prior limb revascularization, once again, you can understand somebody like me will put them on clopidogrel. So there is a statistically significant more chance of that patient being on clopidogrel. But largely, these are balanced groups on both sides. Now, this is important about, so if you look at the percentage of people on clopidogrel in the rivaroxaban group plus aspirin, 50.5%. In the aspirin only plus placebo, 50.5%. So they're both equally balanced. If you look at how long they were on clopidogrel, less than 30 days, 1 month to 3 months, 3 months to 6 months. Once again, they were very balanced. The mean duration of clopidogrel administration is also very balanced. Now, this is the key slide again. So if you, patients with clopidogrel, if you add rivaroxaban, once again, you have got an additional absolute risk reduction of 2.3%. So 18.3 versus 16%. So in other words, adding clopidogrel did not make a major difference compared to not adding clopidogrel, because this is a similar risk reduction we obtained in the entire study, in the composite study. So adding clopidogrel did not make significant difference, but it's still, adding rivaroxaban did add cardiovascular and male benefits. However, the risk of bleeding was higher, both in the TIMI and in the ISTH group. The risk of bleeding was higher by adding clopidogrel. And if you look at bleeding, you can see this very interestingly, because this study, one of the key inclusion criteria was clopidogrel could not be given for more than 6 months. So if you look here, that the study, sorry, just to get my arrow. So the study, see the bleeding risk increases in the first 6 months. See the difference here. And then after the 6 months, they're roughly parallel, which means that the addition of the clopidogrel probably added that additional risk of bleeding. And then if you didn't have clopidogrel, it was a smooth curve like so. So which means that clopidogrel probably caused an additional bleeding risk, probably. Okay, so this is important. And similarly with ISTH, the previous one was TIMI and the second was ISTH. These are two criteria for assessing bleeding. you can see the same sort of absolute risk increase by adding clopidogrel. So if you look at this particular forest curve of the primary endpoint, so you talk about acute limb ischemia, you talk about amputation of vascular etiology, you talk about myocardial infarction, ischemic stroke, and cardiovascular death. And if you see on the two sides, with clopidogrel and without clopidogrel, there is not much difference between the two. Once again, we see this cardiovascular death being favoring placebo, and I don't have a clear explanation of this. And the same thing applies for the secondary outcomes of the hierarchical secondary outcome measures. So I think the perspectives are that benefit of adding of rivaroxaban plus aspirin versus aspirin alone is consistent regardless of use of clopidogrel. The safety of rivaroxaban plus aspirin versus aspirin alone is consistent regardless of background clopidogrel, same thing I think. But adding of clopidogrel as a third agent is associated with a higher rate of bleeding, particularly if the exposure is less than 30 days, more than 30 days. And I think the takeaway from this is, even if we put a stent and we want to put clopidogrel in these patients, I think we should not extend it for more than 30 days. So in the absence of clear benefit, long clopidogrel exposure along with aspirin and rivaroxaban should be minimized. So this is the bottom line summary of, I'm going to finish now, just I've got one more slide. So which basically you have got a reduction, absolute risk reduction, relative risk reduction of a composite of MACE, male, as well as secondary outcome measures by adding rivaroxaban to aspirin. And this risk benefit is irrespective of use of clopidogrel, without a slight increased risk of bleeding, but not a significant life-threatening increased risk of bleeding by adding rivaroxaban. Now, this is the study. I think it's a path-breaking study. I think it is a practice-changing study. It is certainly going to change my practice, and these are my own take-home points. Apologies to Bear because I added this. This is to say that this is a very rigorous, practice-changing, randomized control study with a lot of lessons in two ways as to how to conduct as foolproof a study as possible. The study was an intention to treat study. It was a large study, I think about 500 odd centers or something like that. It included patients. Who did not even continue with the trial medications, which I think was great. In the absence of clear previous guidelines on post-intervention antithrombotic therapy, this is to me a first dedicated PAD study as an outcome measurement post-revascularization. So rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice daily plus 100 milligram aspirin offers absolute risk reduction over aspirin alone in preventing a composite of MACE and male events, and the benefit starts early and increases over time. The benefit is also noted most secondary outcome measures too, and there was no significant life-threatening bleeding risk, although there is slightly increased bleeding risk in the treatment arm. There was no additional benefit by adding clopidogrel to the regimen. But if triple therapy is contemplated, then the use of clopidogrel should be time-bound and short, as bleeding risk increases significantly over time. I can't read my last line, guys, but I guess you can. So, this is important actually. So this is not in the slide deck, but this is basically what Bonanna, this guy, actually says in the Medscape article, that for every 10,000 patients that you treat, you are going to give benefit to 181 patients at the risk of minor or not major bleeding risk in 29 patients. So if you want to put the trial results in numbers, this is what it means. I would like to thank Bear for the slides, and I would like to thank ISBR for giving me the opportunity to speak.
So we have more talk, right?
Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
One more talk, or we start discussing. Women speaking after this.
Can't hear you, Matthew. You may have to come closer, probably.
One more talk. Vimal?
Yeah, I
Matthew,
can't
just
hear
move
you.
your microphone a bit closer, please.
I said, are you speaking after this?
Yeah, I'm speaking here.
Share your screen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. It's very sick. I was wondering.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Is Vimal's screen shared?
can I have
Have
the
I
slides
stopped?
on?
Share your screen, sir.
Hmm?
Right now, you're sharing your face. He's saying share your screen.
Where is that now?
Lower bottom whims.
Lower part to the green arrow.
Uh-huh.
Upward arrow.
Yeah.
So click on that screen share. Share screen.
What happened?
Yeah, now you have got your screen. Now get your PowerPoint open.
Where's my PowerPoint? They're going to open it, right?
You have to open it.
You have to
How do
open
I
it.
open it now? Yeah, I got stuck.
No, it will be somewhere in the laptop, right?
And on this, I don't have my PowerPoint, yeah?
Where
I
is
thought
it?
they're going to load it.
It's very difficult for them to load
Just
it.
ask them to load it, no? I haven't loaded it.
You have seen it, no? Vimal,
Anandji, you have any PowerPoint for him?
Yes, sir, we have. So I'll request Dr. Vinisha to open, or just give me a minute. I'll open. Just give me a minute, sir.
Then I think Anand will share the screen and Dr. Vimal will speak.
Yeah.
like composing those songs, no? Two players, two singers in two different cities. Well, you must have seen the slides before, right?
Yeah, I had seen it, but you know what? I've come to my office just now.
Okay. You need a good secretary, my bro. बोल रहा है अभी मैं.
मेरे को भी लग रहा है. भेज दे एक तेरा उधर से कोयम्बतूर से.
तेरा like का नहीं है.
Are they loading?
Vimal, you'll have to stop sharing your screen for them to share the other screen.
You have to get out of your screen. So on the top there will be a bar. Stop screen share. Correct. Yeah.
I stopped the screen now.
Yes.
They are loading.
They will load.
Anisha has started.
Yeah.
Make it full screen. Yes, it's done.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. So
Well, you'll have to ask them to change the slides.
yeah, okay. So thanks, Biozydus, for allowing us to review this particular papers, both Voyager as well as the COMPASS study. And I think it's important that I should thank Viru for introducing this topic and then also giving us the present status of dual antiplatelet therapy and what is needed more than that. And then obviously Shuvrav told us about the role of dual pathway procedures and the role of rivaroxaban with aspirin as a therapy for patients following an intervention in these patients. Now, we got a lot of ideas about it, and we now realize it that the both benefits as far as meals and meal reduction is better with rivaroxaban and aspirin together in patients following interventions. But is there any advantage in these patients who have chronic peripheral vascular disease? And that is what the COMPASS trial helped us to decide. So can I have the next slide, please? So this is the paper. Basically, this was the COMPASS trial, which was rivaroxaban with or without aspirin in stable peripheral or carotid artery disease. This was an international randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, which was done for both the patient group, both CAD and peripheral vascular disease. Can I have the next slide? Now, if you look at the study design in this particular study, you had both the group, you had more than 27,000 patients that were undertaken. 91% patient had coronary artery disease, and peripheral arterial disease was seen in 27% of patients. Now, these patients had a 30-day run-in of aspirin 100 milligram, and they were randomized 1:1:1 into 3 subgroups. the rivaroxaban 2.5 BD with aspirin. There was a second group of rivaroxaban 5 milligram BD and aspirin 100 milligram. And this was followed up for 23 months, and the study was terminated early because they found that the outcomes were much better and much better than expected. And hence in February 2017, the study efficacy was proven and the study was stopped at that point. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the inclusion and exclusion criteria, you can you actually figure out that this is our day-to-day practice that we follow. All those patients that were included were previous peripheral arterial revascularization done, either surgery or intervention, the previous limb or foot amputation, the intermittent claudication patient. Now, these are daily patients that we see who had an ABI of less than 0.9 or a significant peripheral arterial stenosis greater than or equal to 50%, associated carotid artery revascularization or asymptomatic carotid disease was also included, and patient with coronary artery disease with low ABI. If you look at the exclusion criteria, these were patients mainly where there was a high risk of bleeding, whether there was a stroke within 1 month or lacunar hemorrhage. Patients with poor heart function or poor renal functions were excluded, or those patients who required dual antiplatelet therapy or needed a non-aspirin platelet therapy were excluded. And if there was an indication for anticoagulation therapy, especially post-surgical patients, these were all excluded from this study. Next slide. Okay. Now, as I said, there were more than 7,000 patients who were included in the peripheral arterial group who had a symptomatic disease were included, and some of them also had a associated coronary and peripheral arterial disease. Now, if you look at the number, that's quite huge. The carotid artery disease was nearly 2,000 patients, and the coronary artery disease with asymptomatic PAD was about 1,500 patients. So this is a big study and a very well studied group. Next slide, please. Okay, now let us look at the adding a rivaroxaban in this particular category where aspirin was added on to see how was MACE affected. And you see that the MACE came down by more than 28%. And what was important again, as even in the post-interventional group, as Shuvrov had pointed out, the curve started separating very early. So you start seeing results much earlier on, and as it goes on over the years, the curve separates out very well, and it proves that rivaroxaban 2.5 BD with aspirin had a definite effect on MACE and reduced the MACE by 28%. Next slide. Similarly, if you look at the male reduction, you would see that there is a definite 46% reduction in male, including a major amputation. And if you look at all the three group of patients, you saw that rivaroxaban 2.5 with aspirin had a better outcome compared to the other two groups. And again, the separation of curve was much earlier. So you saw that there's a definite advantage of adding rivaroxaban in our patient with peripheral arterial disease. Next slide. Okay, now this is again the group, and if you see the overall reduction, it was about 31%, again proving the point that rivaroxaban with aspirin is a good combination in these patients with chronic peripheral arterial disease, and the separation starts much earlier. And this is very important. You start seeing the difference much earlier on, and goes on improving as time goes on over 3 years. Next slide. Now, our only worry in adding on coagulant to our antiplatelet therapy was that, is there any major bleeding? Yes, the number of cases of bleeding definitely increased. But if you look at the fatal or intracranial bleeding, they were much less. So what was adding on to this extra bleeding rates? And this was mainly the gastrointestinal bleed, either a gingival bleed or something like that, was adding on to the number of bleed. And in these group of patients, next slide. we had to identify, okay, this is basically telling us about the limitation information of prognosis of patients who suffer from MEAL. Now that is very important. What happens to these patients who have already developed MEAL, and how do they progress further on? And the objective of this sub-analysis was to identify the baseline factor that predict the development of MEAL, to evaluate the prognosis of MEAL who suffer MEAL and impact of MEAL index on other outcomes. And is there any added advantage of adding on low-dose rivaroxaban and aspirin in these patients to improve their peripheral vascular outcomes in patients who have already developed a MEAL? And that was very important to evaluate. Next slide. Look at these, this slide. It tells us a very important outcome here. Now, if you look at this particular pre and post MEAL incidence rate of vascular amputation in patients where there was 200-fold increase in MEAL in patients in whom rivaroxaban was absent, and there was more than 3-time increase in death rate in these patients who have already developed MEAL. And therefore, next slide, please. Look at the outcome once you added rivaroxaban to aspirin, and you realized that the death rate, total amputation, and MACE rates have come down. And if you compare it with aspirin alone, the death rate was much higher, the total amputation was much higher, and even the MACE rate was much higher. Therefore, it is statistically significant difference between rivaroxaban with aspirin or aspirin alone. And therefore, this is a time that we have to really reconsider how we would add rivaroxaban to all our patients with chronic vascular disease. Next slide. Looking at the rivaroxaban plus aspirin, it helps to reduce the vascular interventions versus aspirin alone. And you see that if rivaroxaban was added, the vascular interventional rate was 5.5% versus 7.5% with aspirin alone. And this was significantly different. Even the complication rates were much less, 6.2 versus 8.2. However, the bleeding rates were much higher. And as I said earlier on, the bleeding was primarily in the GI tract, and that needed to be treated as we went on. Next slide, please. The overall, if you look at it, the rivaroxaban vascular dose with ESA provides superior cardiovascular and limb protections. The COMPASS showed that the vascular dose of rivaroxaban reduced the MACE and limited endpoints. The combination of cardiovascular death, MI, and stroke was much less by 1/3, nearly 28% reduction, and there was 46% reduction in male and major amputations. And the consistency with overall COMPASS trial results, rivaroxaban 2.5 BID plus aspirin was superior to aspirin alone, reducing the male and vascular intervention and total peripheral intervention. So again, not only in the post-interventional group, but even in a chronic peripheral vascular group, the rivaroxaban 2.5 with aspirin has shown much better results and reduced the cardiovascular risk as well as male risk in these patients. Next slide. So in COMPASS, in the latest context of various studies, next slide. Now this is what was shown to us by I think this was Virendra, and he showed us that CAPRI, which was a study which was basically comparing clopidogrel versus amputation, and just showed an improvement in MACE. There was not much talk about any limb improvement. The ticagrelor with clopidogrel in Euclid group, again, there was not much mentioned about the peripheral vascular improvement or any amputation effect. When you look at the Karishma, again, the MACE was reduced by 17%, but there was not much mention about the limb or amputation rate. But when you look at the COMPASS group, you realize the MACE came down by 28%, overall ALI or CLI came down by 46%, and amputation rate came down by 70%. However, there was a little increase in the bleeding rate, but again, as I said, this is mainly GI. And in this at this time, I would suggest that if there is a GI bleed that you're worried about, adding a PPI would definitely help reduce the GI bleed in these patients. And that also needs to be evaluated in future studies. Next slide. So again, overall stroke, cardiovascular and heart rate, heart attack was reduced by 28% and reduction of amputation by 70%. That means amputation was avoided in 7 out of 10 patients who otherwise would have lost their limb. And this is a significant improvement just by adding rivaroxaban to aspirin. Next slide. So in conclusion, the therapy initiated sooner can prevent limb loss. PAD remains a frequent and serious disorder with high rate of severe thrombotic incidents, including AMI, stroke, or cardiovascular death, acute limb ischemia, and amputation. Aspirin and rivaroxaban is the only therapeutic option to reduce CV and limb events. Amputation benefits are definitely much more, and the Voyager PAD is the largest antithrombotic trial ever performed in PAD and has been very well evaluated, as Shubhra mentioned. And if you read this particular study, you will realize how they conduct this study and how deep they have gone into in subgroup evaluations and the improvement that you see with various drugs that they have used. Next slide. How does Voyager and Voyager PAD complement Compass in management of PAD? Next slide. Now, this was a slide which also I think Shubhra showed us, and even Virendra showed us, that the major adverse limb event, even in the long term, as you see that in a chronic phase with rivaroxaban and ASA, there was less MACE, less MALE, less amputation, less unplanned revascularization, and less vascular hospitalization. So everything came down by just adding a 2.5 BD rivaroxaban. Next slide. Now, this was the one which I think Virendra showed us, the guidelines that have been so far made as far as asymptomatic patients. They say that there is no reason to add any of these antiplatelet. When you come to symptomatic, a single antiplatelet is enough. If you have done any percutaneous intervention, DAPT in a short term and a single antiplatelet in the long term is what we are probably practicing. And post-surgery, it is a single antiplatelet followed by VKA in the long term is what they have been practicing. But however, the things have changed now. Next slide. With the Compass coming in, well, asymptomatic patient, again, Compass tells us that even with those patients with coronary artery disease with low ABI, well, you can start them off with rivaroxaban, with aspirin. In symptomatic patient, obviously, now as I have discussed with Compass trial, that has come in. When revascularization, well, early Voyager PAD has showed us that there is a definite advantage, and Compass has showed us that even in the long term, that rivaroxaban will help. And Voyager PAD and Compass in late revascularization cases also has been shown effective in treating these patients. Next slide. So in conclusion, at least 1 in 5 patients with PAD undergoing revascularization will have amputation of vascular etiology or MI or ischemic stroke. Voyager has showed a significant reduction in these particular major cardiovascular and limb events. The risk of acute limb ischemia was significantly reduced by 33% in these patients. And the dual pathway therapy is the first antithrombotic regimen proven to have offered significant benefit after peripheral revascularization in randomized clinical trial. And the result of Voyager PAD complements those of Compass in demonstrating consistent protection with DPI across full range of disease in peripheral arterial patients. So you can see that not only in the acute or in post intervention, but also in the chronic cases, one can start using rivaroxaban with aspirin in these patients, keeping in mind bleeding risk is little more and adding PPI probably would be an ideal thing to add up. Next slide. I've got, sorry, did you add those cases? I actually had 4 cases which actually gave us a clear idea, the kind of practice that we have and how it affects the treatment plan. And I think in these kind of patients, adding rivaroxaban 2.5 BD plus aspirin would be an ideal way to treat these patients. I doubt those cases have come in. So I think I would stop here and let us take up the questions and try and see.
So I have those cases. Just give me a moment. I'll share the screen.
Okay. So these are 4 interesting cases which I just picked up recently and where I thought this therapy was worth it.
Am I audible? Can you hear me?
I think we'll discuss those cases as we get in. Meantime,
Okay, see, just start the discussion. So
okay.
now see, finally, definitely, I mean, it does look like this is the right way to go. But, you know, it means another 5,000 rupees extra for a patient per month, you know. And one of the things is the compliance of patients.
So Matthew, I think Anand and Vinisha would be able to fill you in on this. There is some talk about.
Sir, I'll take up this question. Sir, currently, earlier also, in fact, Xarelto was costing around 145 rupee a day. So as sir said, rightly around some 4,500 rupee. But based on the feedbacks which we were regularly getting, we have come up with a patient support program, wherein like the cost of the treatment will go down almost half. So currently what I see will be somewhere around 2,200, 2,300. So first thing address. So sir, that through that patient support program, patient will be getting 1 month free along with 2 months therapy, plus additional around 20-22% discount offered by the agency. So it will come down to half.
Now, I just want to concur real life scenario. I have a patient who's come to me with chronic limb ischemia or say even critical limb ischemia. So when do I start this? Do I start it before the procedure or after the procedure? Because normally we prime them with antiplatelets, then go ahead and do the procedure. So what is your suggestion now? Do we still stick on to that and after a point bridge and start them on Xarelto, or do we start them 5 days before, a day before, any of those? Because here, you know, we start them and the drug starts working immediately. You really don't have to wait for a couple of days like any of the other drugs.
Right. So, sir, at least from the Voyager PAD trial, we know that the drug can be started immediately post-procedure. So, the median time for initiating the drug post the revascularization was 5 days.
No,
So,
see, we know one thing with dual antiplatelet,
right.
Not acute occlusion of a vessel. See, like people like me, we started doing this procedure in 90. And the biggest problem we had those days were actually, we do an angioplasty, the vessel occludes. We put a stent and we see thrombosis. And dual antiplatelet completely changed that. We hardly see that anymore. Now, to me, we are still not sure whether that component is going to change. And that's why I was asking, do we put them on dual antiplatelet? 24 hours later, we start them on this combination of aspirin and Xarelto, or do you say that we can safely start it? And again, you know, we know that though we don't measure the INR, we don't see the INR, but we know that the bleeding time is prolonged. And how safe is it to do a procedure with this? Because the surgeons don't operate with Xarelto in, you know.
Matthew.
Actually, yeah, Shura, will you take that or I can?
So Matthew, can I just quickly make a point about, as I was reading this and as I was trying to assimilate what I was reading, it is indeed a little bit of a significant shift of posture and a significant change in mindset for all of us. And like you say, when a patient first comes to see you with a PAD, with a chronic PAD or requiring an intervention, we start them on dual antiplatelets usually. And then we carry on the procedure with the dual antiplatelets. We carry on the dual antiplatelets for a varying amount of time depending upon individual practice. But having read this now, the way I would look at it would be that I would actually start them on rivaroxaban and aspirin when I see them first, because COMPASS tells you that even in a chronic setting, this is going to be beneficial. I'm going to hold the rivaroxaban for a day before the procedure. I will do the procedure, and then after a day of the procedure, I'm going to put the patient back on rivaroxaban and aspirin. I would add clopidogrel if I have done extensive stenting, etc. I would add clopidogrel, but I would limit the clopidogrel to a short period of time.
But you know, Shuvro, there is a little this thing here. We normally start dual antiplatelet at least 3 days in advance, minimum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my approach would be you start with dual antiplatelet and rivaroxaban before the procedure. Continue with both of them for at least 4 or 5 days. We have realized that the clopidogrel, the bleeding rates, it is what you're worried about. So bleeding rates are maximum if you carry on with clopidogrel more than 30 days. You can stop it in about 4 or 5 days and continue with rivaroxaban with aspirin. Probably that would be a good strategy. And normally you take an aspirin of about 150. You probably start with 100 of aspirin, 75 of clopidogrel 3 days prior. Rivaroxaban you can start 1 day prior and do your procedure and continue with rivaroxaban and aspirin for as long as you want. Probably that is what I would probably,
But would you want to give rivaroxaban before the procedure? Because traditionally, surgically speaking, it is held for at least a day. Am I right, Vinisha? It is held for a day?
Yes.
Yeah. So personally, I will not necessarily start. See, if you believe the result of COMPASS, then in your pre-intervention period is what we would call chronic. We know what we would call chronic atherosclerotic disease, right? So we have already shown that is you add a benefit by adding rivaroxaban. So personally, I would start rivaroxaban the first time I see the patient, because the patient is a chronic PAD patient.
Yes.
So I'll start the rivaroxaban first time I see the patient with aspirin. I will not probably, it's not something I've done. I'm saying that on the basis of this trial, if we have to take it to its logical conclusion, you use the COMPASS data for the period before the intervention, and you take the Voyager data for the period after the intervention. So therefore, you start with aspirin and rivaroxaban the first time you see the patient. You hold the rivaroxaban for the procedure. You want to start clopidogrel 3 days before. That's great. That's cool. And you carry it on for a short period of time.
Yes.
Then you stop the clopidogrel and you carry on with aspirin and rivaroxaban.
Probably that is a wise thing. Yeah. You can stop
No,
it.
the thing is, this rivaroxaban dose is extremely low as compared to the usual therapeutic dose. I don't think it will make any difference. Plus, during the intervention, we're used to giving heparin.
Yeah.
So I don't know if 2.5 milligram BD of rivaroxaban makes any difference.
Okay.
Given a personal preference, I would continue. I don't see why I should stop.
You know what, Rochan, the only point comes in is that if you continue with intervention, if you have to shift the patient for surgery.
Yeah, that's different. But again, 2.5 milligram is an extremely low dose.
Exactly.
So especially when you're
It's very similar to the last trial when we were using very low dose.
So when we are talking about using rivaroxaban during the procedure, rivaroxaban added on top of an aspirin and a clopidogrel will definitely increase the bleeding.
5.1 or something like that. It's still
so ideally, and as per the prescribing information, before any procedure, you will have to stop it for at least 24 hours.
24 hours.
Considering that this dose is a small dose, 2.5 milligram, roughly its effect would last, anticoagulant effect would last for unto 12 hours. So at least ensure that you use
overnight.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry, Viru has a question. Viru wants to.
So as Dr. Matthews rightly said, I think, just 1 second. So I don't know, over time we will definitely change, but right now, as Dr. Matthew told, why not to just use with dual antiplatelet as we all are doing for a month or 15 days? We have never seen any stent thrombosis or below-knee-plasty occlusion. So just continue with our dual antiplatelet, and maybe in a month or maybe after 15 days or 3 weeks, you can just slowly add your 2.5 BD and take off your clopidogrel. So that is one way of doing it. I mean, that's because we have seen few of our patients on 3 with bleed. So I don't keep 2.5 with clopidogrel. So just do with your routine stuff for a month. As we all, for a month, we don't have any problem. And then shift, just take out your clopidogrel and keep your 2.5 BD Xarelto. That should work. I mean, that's what
I
I'm
think
doing.
that also sounds logical.
Can you hear me?
So at least,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
What I was
Yeah,
saying,
Nisha, tell me.
is a large proportion of patients are patients who come with non-healing ulcers.
Right.
Honestly speaking, we cannot do this practice. We have to treat them, do an angioplasty, they are on antiplatelets. The plastic surgeon who takes over the patient is very, very against taking them with multiple drugs. You know, sometimes they just allow us a little aspirin. So that's another reason. See, though we talk about chronic limb ischemia, in my practice, it's actually in my group's practice here, the vast majority are actually patients who have limb-threatening ischemia or non-healing ulcers.
Right.
So
I think that's a very important point.
yeah, that's
We had this discussion earlier also, and if you look at the data, though the Voyager has a very large component of critical limb ischemia, almost 30% or so, the Compass trial actually has a very small number of critical limb ischemia, if I'm not
That's
wrong.
a chronic patient group, boss. That's
Agreed,
Yeah.
but it has very few people with history of chronic limb ischemia also. So if you look at it that way, even in the Voyager trial, within 5 days they have started this therapy. The mean, I think, is 5 days of starting therapy.
Right.
So from that point of view, I'm not too sure how much of a difference this low dose will make. But as Dr. Matthews said, for us, critical limb ischemia is the primary reason we intervene most of the time.
most of the
Very
time.
few smaller number of claudic
So
infections.
that is one important exclusion criteria that I mentioned, is because if you look at their exclusion criteria, they've excluded major gangrene. But in real life practice, a lot of us will see more than a toe gangrene presenting to us, right? So those group of patients were excluded in Voyager. Anything beyond the metatarsal gangrene was excluded. So that does compromise a significant proportion of our practice, day-to-day practice. So that Voyager doesn't quite apply to that group of patients, I don't think.
So basically, if we look at the Voyager trial, as Sir said, did have more than 20% of patients who had chronic limb ischemia. And coming back to Dr. Shuvro's point regarding patients who were excluded with major tissue loss. So these were patients with severe gangrene or severe ischemic ulceration. The reason why they were excluded was because they were at the end stage disease, and adding them into the trial would not provide significant benefit in terms of differences in treatment interventions that are being used. So that was the reason why
But that is true, but that is a selection bias. That is a selection bias.
No, also must be that those people may need surgery immediately.
I think the main key point that comes from the Voyager trial for the benefits for rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram being added onto aspirin is that you add rivaroxaban early onto your standard of care, which is aspirin, and continue the patient for a longer period of time. You will see early benefit in terms of reduction of Mayo events, reduction of index limb revascularizations or unplanned revascularization, reduction in terms of repeat hospitalizations for any thrombotic event, and reduction of MACE. So and major amputation. So that is the benefit if you start treatment early and if you continue the patient moving forward.
Nidhisha, can you tell me one thing?
Yes,
what is
sir.
the practice of the cardiologists as of today? Dual antiplatelet, or they have also gone? They have also followed the Compass.
So right now, at least for cardiologists and vascular surgeons, we are seeing a shift in terms of practice towards the DPI strategy. The reason being, even if you look at the pathophysiology, or even if you look at the two pathways on which the rivaroxaban acts, it makes sense to add rivaroxaban on top of an antiplatelet, because whether you're using a single antiplatelet or a dual antiplatelet, you're just targeting platelet activation. Whereas when you're adding rivaroxaban on top of an antiplatelet, you're targeting both the coagulation cascade, you're targeting thrombin as well as your
No,
We
no, what
got
I
that.
meant was, do they also start one day before or immediately after intervention?
No.
So with the Voyager data coming in, they are starting Rivaroxaban 2.5 after the procedure. So they do not they do not use it prior. But if it is a chronic PAD, as Dr. Shivro said, the patient should be initiated on treatment once you're seeing him, and probably just before the procedure, one day before the procedure, you might have to stop Rivaroxaban, continue him on aspirin, and then restart Rivaroxaban once the hemostasis is achieved.
So one of the questions that is in the panel questions, and I think Matthew and Rochan were discussing, Dr. Kamal Pathak probably has asked that question. And it's a very valid question we discussed in the vascular forum as well, is that actually, I know that the guidelines don't say that we should give aspirin and clopidogrel, right? The guidelines don't say that, but we do.
Right.
That's what we do.
Right.
And so there is no study that compares aspirin clopidogrel versus aspirin rivaroxaban. There isn't anything. It isn't there. And on the background of this trial now, I don't think it will be ethical to do a study like that either. So it probably will never appear. So I think we have to, and also remember one thing, that in our daily practice, we have used anticoagulation on a case-by-case basis, right? We have done a case in which we thought that, okay, there is some residual thrombus, etc. We have put those patients on anticoagulation for a short period of time.
A week or something, not long term like this,
Not long term, but short term we have, right? So the point about dual pathway inhibition has been used selectively. Now the question is that should we widen that use to all patients? That is the question. And it makes logical sense, scientific sense, that you are trying to hit, aggregation of platelets and thrombosis at the same time. So it makes sense from that point of view. Now,
Shivro, one reason I would be keen to put patients on this combination after at least the procedure, after the surgery, is purely because we are not certain about the efficacy of clopidogrel in our population, because we really do not
Exactly.
have got resistance, So
absolutely.
we are on a drug and we are not. So at least here, aspirin resistance is much lower.
Correct.
And then we got a drug which again is not proven to have any resistance. So maybe this is a much more standardized form of therapy. So maybe in our practice, what we, going through this whole thing, what we would do is, till a surgical procedure is done, we still be on antiplatelets. Following that procedure, what we do is, a lot of it is below knee. We have them on antiplatelet and heparin. We stop the heparin, probably stop one of the antiplatelets. Surgery is over. After the wound is kind of healed, probably we'll shift to this. Because our practice, a vast majority is diabetic people coming with ulcers.
The only difference I would say, Matthew, to what you are saying is that if I see the patient, let's say 1 month prior to the procedure, I would start the patient on this rivaroxaban aspirin a month before the procedure even, and then stop the rivaroxaban 3 days, like Vimal said, start the clopidogrel, tide over the, or not even start the clopidogrel, tide over the surgical period, and then restart the rivaroxaban. As Viru says, that the experience of using aspirin and clopidogrel and reduction of the rate of stent thrombosis is a practical experience that we have all had, right? So therefore, just ditching.
Cardiologists here, they said that currently their practice is, unless there's an LV clot.
Unless there is?
Unless there's a left ventricular clot, they do not start them on Xarelto or dabigatran, any of these drugs. It's just Brilinta aspirin for a year, after which it's only aspirin. And that's the kind of current strategy that they all follow after acute coronary event. See,
but this might be modified by these two trials, Matthew.
The indications here are different, sir. The indications here are different. If you're talking about LV clots and use of dabigatran, there we are talking about the anticoagulant dose.
Right.
What
we are trying to tell you is, whatever we have discussed so far, this practice has not been carried over, at least with the cardiologists here, and this is a big group of people practicing. None of them have really taken this practice. They're still on Brilinta aspirin as a combination, and with time, probably they will shift. And we also may not take it exactly the way you say, because the kind of patient population we see in our practice, if we do revascularization, say we do about 20 to 25 a month, of which, believe me, 20 of them are people who need some form of surgery following the procedure. So what we would do is, we are looking at this maybe as a much better a combination for long-term patency, but may not start it before the procedure, but we would probably start on antiplatelets, finish the surgery, and then following that, start them on this. And then
I think
probably
that is also fair. That is also fair.
Yes, there are two more points here, which I think Dr. Matthew has made well. Number one, if they're using Brilinta, I think the cost will be maybe not very different. But second point is, if you look at claudicants, the risk of major adverse limb event is supposed to be low, maybe about 7% at 5 years or 10% at 10 years, something like that, reasonably low. Whereas critical limb ischemia is high. So maybe I would say that critical limb ischemia, if you get, you should probably use rivaroxaban. I think that for me would be a firm indication. In the patient with critical limb ischemia, I would definitely use.
So, sir, just coming back to the discussion on the cardiologists that we had. Now, I think during the beginning of the talk, I think Shuvra sir also showed us the slide where the 2.5 milligram has been evaluated. Now, if we look at the Atlas ACS trial in acute coronary syndrome, rivaroxaban was given on top of aspirin plus clopidogrel, where it did show a reduction in terms of MACE events, all-cause death, CV deaths, and also at the same time 31% reduction in stent thrombosis. Correct. So that is in the ACS setting. Now coming to the chronic coronary artery disease, the current guidelines, the ESC 2019 guidelines, actually recommend rivaroxaban on top of aspirin in all high-risk patients with a recurrent MI, with a diabetes mellitus, with a peripheral artery disease, with a chronic kidney disease with an EGFR less than 60 ml per minute. So the guidelines are also recommending rivaroxaban 2.5 on top of aspirin in chronic coronary artery disease. We also have a recommendation for peripheral artery disease in the ESVM guidelines as well as in the CLTI guidelines. So the guidelines are also taking it up. And Voyager PAD again is a very important data, especially in the PAD subset, where there are currently no studies in patients who are having peripheral artery disease, be it chronic or those patients who are having undergoing any intervention. So right now it is the biggest trial, 7,000 odd patients plus 6,000 odd patients in Voyager. So the data is huge, the evidence is large, the benefit is proven, and at the same time, you also have the guideline recommendations backing it up.
Vidisha,
I think there are lots of questions in the question and answer. I think first we should answer them, then we should go. So I ask my colleagues to start with these questions. You can see these questions in the question and answer panel.
Right.
I think, to be honest with you, the questions are along the lines of what the discussion is.
Right.
Just one quick question to Vidisha very quickly. Is there I couldn't work out an age bar for starting rivaroxaban plus aspirin. Was there any in the study? I tried looking for it. Say, for example, my yesterday's case, I did a BTK yesterday in an 81-year-old.
Right.
So I stopped my pen after starting to write rivaroxaban. I started thinking that, okay, 81, is this too high an age for me to do a DPI, or should we stick to single antiplatelet? Is there any data coming from either COMPASS and rivaroxaban about an age discrepancy regarding the bleeding risk?
So
if I can add to that, also ESRD patients.
Right.
ESRD is an issue.
They have a clear guideline according to GFR. So I think age
below 45 you can't give.
So taking the first question on age, now if we look at the COMPASS data, there is a clear-cut delineation in terms of the subgroup analysis in terms of age, less than 65 and above 65. And the benefits continued irrespective of the age of the patient, whether they were less than 65 or above 65 or above 70 years old. So, there is
regarding the risk of bleeding.
So risk of bleeding, definitely in elderly, there is a slight increase, but that is not that is not outrunning the benefit, the ischemic benefits in the trial. The net clinical benefit still remains.
Net clinical benefit applies to over 82. Is that the bottom line?
I think
Right.
that's a different group. Above 80 is a different group from above 65. At least with neuro cases, we know very clearly that the bleeding risk increases
the
dramatically
only
at
thing
that point.
So the only
Not
thing
sure
that
about that.
you might have to consider is also on the comorbidities. So in case the patient is having a renal function less than 30 ml, probably you would not want to start rivaroxaban as it increases the bleeding risk. So you have to
single dose of aspirin. You have to excuse me. It's nearly 7, and I'm still
Yeah.
not. So thanks so
I'll have
much.
to.
We will change our practice, and when we meet again, we'll make you happier.
Okay, I have one simple question.
Yes.
Videshi, that is for you, Vidisha.
yes, sir.
Have they shown any patency of the arterial system? Have they worked on that?
No, they have not.
So
I'm not seeing the mace coming down, the male coming down, but is the arterial patency has been demonstrated by Doppler?
There is a duplex ultrasound sub-study which is a part of the Voyager study. So the results are not yet out. Like I already mentioned before, if you look at the ACS trial, there was a significant reduction in terms of stent thrombosis, which was reduced by 31%. So hypothetically, it has been hypothesized that the rivaroxaban plus aspirin combination would improve patency in terms of in such patients. So there is a sub-study planned, which is a part of Voyager, whose results are still awaited. We do have evidence in the phase 3 trial of ACS.
Sir, we are too early to say, but I have seen patients in which those were in dual, especially the FEMPOP group, I would say. FEMPOP group used to come after 2 years of occlusion and all that. So we have started putting this patient on Ecosprin and 2.5 BD. And see, we don't have this drug for pretty long time now. So last 6 months, I would say we have seen a difference. So the drug works. And I think the time will tell. So right now, yeah, we can go with our dual antiplatelet, and then those patients who come on, I have just done today one case in which we had done a plasty in January and the wound didn't heal and he stays in Amritsar. So finally he came. So I'll put him on that. So, definitely there are thrombotic component in below the knee arteries.
Yes, small vessel.
Subset of patients, definitely I think the medicine will help. And the trial, as Dr. Shubhro told, is, they had done a fantastic detailed study. So time will tell. And we don't have a experience of pretty long time, so we can't even comment, but 3 to 6 months is the time frame which we have used, and there is a difference. So especially in those patients, FEMPOP, who used to occlude, so we have started on this. So let's see, let's hope it works.
So Rochan and Matthew is gone. Vimal, would you, in just for the next 3 months of practice, Matthew, would you consider not giving this to over 80s?
No, I will never.
At present, yes. I'll be little more careful.
Yeah, because seriously, we would like to know how this works with younger patients, and we have to get comfortable with the drug, because we start finding things we have to see how it works, because we once upon a time we were using a lot of Brilinta. People were having kind of bruising all over the body, and we started finding that it was not an easy drug to handle. So I think we start slow. But we will definitely, for the below knee disease, where there's extensive disease and the distal runoffs are poor, we really think this will make a difference. On the other hand, with a short occlusion, the SFA, fantastic runoff, any shit will work, because we know that all these parameters also work, right? It's not just saying that, this is the greatest drug. But that group, bad distal runoff, single vessel distal runoff, we got a wound, just sort of healing, and when we start this, and if this does well, we're going to be really happy. By the way, how fast is the price drop going to come? Because honestly speaking, even if the patient promise, a vast majority will discontinue after 3-4 months unless it is feasible for them,
Okay. The 4 cases that I was showing were the same types,
1 month?
Cases, but I think maybe next time.
Huh?
The 4 cases that I was planning to show were basically based on those kind of things. Especially you have a bad dissection. So you are using a drug-coated balloon and there's a dissection which is still lurking there. You will be interested in having these drugs on board.
Since Anand said the price is dropping, when do we expect it to drop?
So we had already initiated that patient support program. So you can start putting your patient, and my colleague will be sharing the details of the patient support program with you, maybe by tomorrow itself. And then a patient will be supplied directly with that price of around 75, 76 rupees per tab, per day.
Can Arun, can Murli, we haven't heard Murli's view.
Yeah.
I want to just add to what you told, Shubhro. I don't know, when you want to start in old patients, better to check an MRI brain and see how much of bleeding spots are there in the brain. Because now, even for starting a dual antiplatelet, the neurologist started counting these asymptomatic hemorrhages, especially with the susceptibility weighted imaging. I think that will give an idea in real world patients when you want to start. The only bleeding which is very dangerous is a brain bleeding within the brain. I think we'll have to start looking into that also before we start on really very old patients. Otherwise,
You mean the tiny gradient?
I do not know. I think there are some papers coming up. I do not have the complete data as of it. But when you look at now, people are looking at these number of bleeds to start even in a stroke patient. Now they want to decide whether they want to start on a single antiplatelet or a dual antiplatelet. You know, they start looking at these areas on the brain. I think we will get some data from the neurology circle. Then once we get those data out, then we will have a better idea of using in real world patients.
The data comes from the cardiologist, right? Believe me. Data from the neurologist and all are very, very delayed. Those guys publish. Very soon we'll have data to know. Seriously, whatever we learn, whatever we follow, it's all from the cardiologist. Then after that, we follow. So that's one of the good things about cardiologists. They publish like crazy. So thanks so much, Arun, for inviting me. Thank you so much for being in the meeting. Anyway, just one last request. Anytime we do a webinar, we make a request to the hosting company. If you really care for us, we would love it if you supply us with good quality N95 masks. It makes a big difference. Thank you so much.
कुछ मांगता ही है तेरे को.
अबे सच बता रहा हूँ मैं.
Feedback taken.
Every ward boy in our department has got N95. We say if you want us to do a webinar, pay us with N95 masks.
We will. Okay. Great. Matthew, it was nice.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks a lot.
Any more questions, Arun?
So I think what I could understand by this, that in spite of having lots of discussion, even the expert have not reached to any consensus that this is the statement that lies true for Rivaroxaban.
See, I'm not denying.
Because
Arun, there's no experience with us, but we will follow something.
That's all,
But Arun, one thing I'll say that this is a practice changing.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Because
It will change the practice over time. Yeah.
I sometimes wonder why didn't we think of a dual pathway approach?
no, I
The
think
picture is so clear.
Aspirin and warfarin also at times.
So just out of interest for the IRs, of the 7,000 odd patients that was randomized, what proportion do you think was done by radiologists?
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's
4.6%.
4%.
Yeah.
Some 60% was done by cardiologists.
So Shubhro, abroad it's the cardiologists who are doing it. It's in India, some sections where the interventional guys are doing it, and quite a few work is being done by the vascular surgeons.
Yes.
So it's old timers like myself and Matthew and Murli and all of us are hanging on. I don't know. Murli,
No, it's not that. In the UK, it is all done by IRs. In Calcutta, it is all done by IRs. But obviously there is a practice change based on where you are.
It is done by the others. Wherever there is no money, the IRs get it.
Yes. BTK, you spend 2 hours.
Yeah.
Patient is poor, so that goes to IR. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks so
Bye,
much.
guys.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Catch up with all of you and thank you very much.
So in fact,
Dr. Shivro, so would you want to conclude this webinar?
I think Arun should conclude. I think Arun should
Dr.
I think to be honest with you, in your medical practice, you read a lot of articles, but sometimes you read an article and you say, wow, okay. And, I must say that reading this, I felt that it was, all of us review a lot of articles, right? We review articles for lots of journals. So, when I was reading this, I was trying to pick out faults. And it's very difficult to find faults in this paper. So that is one thing I would say, that it's a well-conducted study. And if you say that you go by the evidence, and if the evidence is this, I agree that we still haven't evaluated dual antiplatelet versus rivaroxaban, true. But allowing for that, the fact that our guideline-based standard practice of single antiplatelet only should now change to this.
Yeah, I agree with you, Shubhro. So what happens, what I could understand, that whatever we are doing, what is our clinical practice, we think we are doing good. We don't know what is the better way. Yeah. So I think this
you should be open to change.
You should be open to changes. That you should not stick to that. This is, we are doing it. We are doing very good work.
No, but
maybe results might improve.
I think the corona-prone older people like Matthew and Vimal, the corona-prone does not apply to us. But what I'm saying is, I think they've hit the nail on the head. That right. I think Viru said the same thing in spite of not being old. Is that we should start slow. We should start with the safe people, which are the under 65s, and then if we feel that this is working well, then we should extrapolate it to the wider group. So yesterday, honestly speaking, I finished the case and I was reading this paper. So I started writing, rivaroxaban, and then I said, okay, 81, stop. Okay. So
yeah, I think we'll have to identify the high risk group in this, especially kidney disease and bad cardiac disease. So all those exclusion criteria has to be really looked into. And as Murli said, some patients who have intracranial things.
I think that's a very good point.
That is what they have also mentioned.
The other thing for all of us to understand is the pharmacokinetics of rivaroxaban. It's actually, once it's absorbed very well, then I think 25% is excreted by the kidneys, 50% is taken up by the liver. So, and then it's excreted in bile. So you need to have this in the back of your mind. So when you're prescribing in terms of which diseases that you should not give or reduce the dose, you should have that in the background of your mind.
Any other major interaction with other drugs?
The major interactions with other drugs. So basically, the interactions are again with anti-HIV and antifungals, and among the antibiotics, you would see some interaction with erythromycin. So, and SSRIs and SNRIs. Apart from that, there's not a significant interaction with.
So bottom line,
dose what we have is the 2.5 milligram dose here. So
there is a wide variety of rivaroxaban doses, as you know. DVT is different, for PE, it's all different.
And just to make a point here, so especially considering that we did have some discussion on stroke. If you look at the COMPASS trial, the major benefit has been reduction in stroke outcomes. So by 42%. And if you look at the inclusion criteria, only acute stroke patients were excluded. That is anytime
within 1 month.
Within 1 month.
Yeah.
Rest of these patients were included. So you see the consistency in terms of outcomes, both in the overall COMPASS population, in the COMPASS PAD population, in the COMPASS carotid population as well. So,
no, I think the bottom line is, you asked me to summarize. I would just say one line, that is to say that we should be open to change.
Correct.
We shouldn't change overnight. We shouldn't change necessarily because a company has asked us to change, but we should be at least have an open mind to change. And it is a practice changing article. Paper, and if our cumulative experience is pointing towards that, like Viru said, that he has seen benefits, and we have all seen benefits by adding anticoagulants in various points of our career. So I think it is worthwhile having an institutional or a group practice change, that we should do this as a group.
I think we should, ask the Biozydas group to, probably involve 5-6 of us. And if we can come up with a data of, say, maybe 50, 100 patients, I think that would be good.
I know that we are all very late, but I had an idea to discuss actually, maybe with Biozydas or mostly amongst ourselves. And this is completely different. And I don't know, we will not be able to conduct a trial as rigorous as what they have. We just don't have the setup to do so. But I think one other big area is all our fistula and our central vein in the venous setting, which is more prothrombotic. There is no guidance at all. At least in the arteries, there is some guidance There is no guidance at all for single antiplatelet, dual antiplatelet, adding an anti-clotting agent. So I think for our fistula and our central vein patients, which to be honest is a big part of our practice, this is very, very tempting because the dual pathway inhibition in a venous setting, I think will work even better than in the arteries. Study idea, Viru.
Yeah, let's see.
So,
CKD patients, we can.
No, the CKD patients. That's true. That's true. That's true. You can't.
Yeah, it won't be that easy. I mean, time will tell. Anecdotal incidences will come, and then slowly we may. I don't know.
But tell me one thing: if doesn't it get washed in dialysis?
Yeah,
Uh,
it should.
it's not dialysable, sir.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's not.
So it doesn't apply. Sorry.
And,
So
and
it's I think, yeah.
Sorry.
It doesn't apply.
Food interaction means absorption regarding to absorption.
No food interactions.
No.
The absorption is better after food. So they say
After.
eat after 30 minutes of taking. So it's good.
That's
after
only
food.
for the doses about 10 milligrams,
20.
not for doses below
2.5.
10. So you can take it with or without food.
Okay. Food.
Very good.
So-
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
So
much.
I thank all of y'all for attending this seminar, and especially it was a very engaging meeting. A lot of discussions on the Rivaroxaban 2.5 and also on your current practice. I thank all the panelists and Dr. Matthew, Dr. Virender, Dr. Shuvro, Dr. Vimal Someshwar, and Dr. Arun for giving us this opportunity and for this wonderful meeting. Thank you, one and all.
thank you. Thank you.
Probably
everyone.
nothing could have been this.
Yeah.
Thank
Well
you
done.
very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catch up, man.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Wear your
Bye.
mask, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Ajit, sir.
It's right there.
Thank you.